Chris Sale has won his first career Cy Young Award at the age of 35. What are realistic expectations for him and the rest of the rotation, good and bad, in 2025? I'll tell you next. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Thursday, November 21st. Your source of news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show on Twitter at Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and an Instagram as well. You can find all of my written work, bravestoday.com, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. And Chris Sale, as we expected, won the National League Cy Young last night with 26 of 30 first place votes, easily beating Zach Wheeler of the Philadelphia Phillies for the award. It is the first career Cy Young win for Chris Sale. He had a 7-year stretch from 2012 through 2018 where his worst finish in the Cy Young race was 6th. He had one second place finish, a third, 2 fourths, and 2 fifths in that stretch. Never could seemingly win the thing. And then, because of all of the injuries and everything, only threw 151 innings from 2020 to 2023. According to Elias Sports Bureau, Chris Sale is the first pitcher in baseball history to finish in the top 5 in Cy Young voting for 5 straight years, finish outside the top 5 in 5 years, and then earn another top 5 finish. And he is, if my math is right, I believe he is the 5th oldest player to win his first career Cy Young. Early win, Dennis Eckersley, R.A. Dickey, and Warren Spahn, I believe is it. So, congratulations to Chris Sale. Amazing season. We talked to him last night after the award. He was obviously very excited about it, was very modest about joining that group of Braves with Cy Youngs. The Braves have 8 Cy Youngs in their franchise history. That is second best in baseball. The Dodgers have 12. Atlanta, Warren Spahn obviously has the 1 in 57. Tom Glavine has 2. Greg Maddux has 3. And John Smoltz has 1. And Maddux last night was the one on MLB Network that announced the win as Chris Sale. He did it thanks to an NL Triple Crown and coming very close to a baseball Triple Crown. He went 18-3. The 18 wins led baseball with a 2.38 ERA, which also led baseball, and 225 strikeouts, which led the National League, and was 2 behind Tariq Skubal of the Tigers, the unanimous winner in the American League for Cy Young, for the lead in all of baseball. 174 ERA plus led baseball. 209 FIP also led baseball. 0.5 home runs per 9 innings led baseball. And 11.4 strikeouts per 9 innings. So he has won, he was an All-Star this year. He has won the Gold Glove. He has won Comeback Player of the Year and now the Cy Young. And my immediate thought is, I wonder what he can do next year. So today's show, yes, we're excited about Chris Sale winning the Cy Young. He absolutely deserved it. Phillies fans who are angry that Zach Wheeler did not win really are biased by the fact that Wheeler was a Philly. Because he beat Chris Sale in innings. He beat Chris Sale in number of starts. He didn't beat Chris Sale in anything else. He didn't beat him in strikeouts. Even though he had 22 more innings than Sale did? He didn't beat him in ERA. He didn't beat him in wins. He didn't beat him in anything else. Kind of wild. Also, fun fact, Chris Sale was really close to giving a Braves pitcher a 20-win season. If you look at this, he lost 3 games, and 2 of these were like really winnable games. June 7th, we lost 2-1 to the Nationals. Chris Sale gave up 2 runs. He struck out 10 in 7 innings. We just couldn't score, and we lost. And then June 27th, he struck out 11. He allowed 1 run to the White Sox, and we lost 1-0. So Chris Sale came close to winning 20 games for the Braves, which In case you forgot, in 2023, Spencer Strider was the only 20-game winner in the league. He went 20-5. And in 2022, Kyle Wright went 21-5. So Atlanta was close to having 3 consecutive seasons of a 20-game winning pitcher. And so that's where I want to go with today's show. What are reasonable expectations for this rotation next year, both good and bad? And how should that construct your offseason? And I want to start with the best case scenario first, okay? Because obviously this was an amazing year by the Braves rotation. If you, by any meaningful or realistic evaluation here, this was a very good season for the rotation. Braves starters had a 3.58 ERA, went 56-46. But as we've talked about before, that encompasses a lot of poor performances from depth starters. Of your core members of your rotation, Sale, Fried, Morton, and Lopez all made 25 or more starts. And Spencer Schwellenbach made 21. And those starts were good starts. But outside of that, you had Spencer Strider made 2 starts. His ERA was actually only 7 because of the injury, remember? Not great. Everybody else was not great as a starter. AJ Smith-Shawver, correction, 4 1/3 innings scoreless against the Cubs. The 1 start he made this year was good from an ERA perspective. Hurston Waldrop's 2 starts, 16.71 ERA. Alan Winans 2 starts, 15.26. Bryce Elder had a 6.52 in 10 starts. Darius Vines, 8.56 ERA in 4 appearances and 2 starts. Ray Kerr struggled in his 2 starts. Grant Holmes, who I love, and who they are stretching out as a starter in the offseason, his ERA as a whole was good. It was a 4.01 as a starter and 3.12 as a reliever. He had a 3.56 overall. Outside of your core rotation members, you struggled a bit as a pitching staff. And when you look at what are reasonable expectations for this rotation next year, you have a very good core to start off with, right? You're going to have Chris Sale. You're going to have Reynaldo Lopez. You're going to have Spencer Schwellenbach. You should be able to get a full season out of Spencer Schwellenbach and out of Reynaldo Lopez. Both of those guys in the majors, Schwellenbach threw 123 and 2/3 innings. Reynaldo Lopez threw 135. You should be able to get more out of them. Schwellenbach didn't come up until partway through the year. You were cycling through other starters out of AAA until then. Lopez, if you remember, they were giving him extra rest days because he was converting from the relief to a starter. And a lot of us thought he was going to pitch every 5th or 6th day, and then at a certain point they'd put him in the bullpen. And instead, they just used the extra rest to keep him in the rotation almost all year until the very end. He did also deal with 2 injured list stints, which reduced his availability. So again, combined, those guys had less than 260 innings. You should be able to get, I'm going to say, 175 out of both. I feel like Lopez picking up an additional 40 innings is realistic. And I'm going to say for Schwellenbach, it's not even a jump of that many innings when you consider the fact that he threw 45 in the minors. So between the regular season and between the major leagues and the minor leagues in the regular season last year, he threw 168 and 2/3 innings. Needed one more out somewhere, honestly. Come on, man. You're killing me here. Would have been really nice. So one reason to feel confident about next season is you're going to get full seasons out of both of those guys. So that is some of your best case scenarios for the rotation next year. Another reason to be optimistic about the Braves rotation going into next year is you're going to get Spencer Strider back. Now, the caveat with this is, one, we don't know when, and we don't know how effective he will be. But Under the best case scenario assumption here, you have to think it's in the first month or two of the season, and you have to assume he's going to be back to maybe he's not 20-win lead baseball and strikeout Spencer Strider, but he's going to be rather effective. I think what helps here is this wasn't a standard Tommy John complete UCL tear that they were repairing here, right? This was an internal brace because there was some instability in the UCL because of a bone spur. The rehab process is different, and it is the surgery itself was less intense than a standard Tommy John because the UCL was intact. It may have been a little unstable because of the bone spur, but it was intact. Under the best case scenario we're operating here, you have to assume that you can get Spencer Strider back, let's say for 20 starts. Let's say you get 120 innings out of him, right? It feels like the best case scenario here for Spencer Strider, we're going to say, let's say 125 innings. That's somewhere between 5 and 6 innings to start. And let's say that his strikeout stuff is mostly back to normal. That would put you probably 170 strikeouts, 175 strikeouts, an ERA of probably somewhere, I say probably around 3. I'm going to guess it around 3 would be a good season for Spencer Strider. And I'll remind you, 2022, when he went from relief to starting, he hit through to a 267. 2023, he had a 386 ERA. Some of that was homer issues. He gave up 22 homers, 1.1 per 9, in his 186 and 2/3 innings. And arguably, that's probably the reason why he didn't finish better than 4th for the Cy Young, was the fact that his ERA would have been the highest of anybody to ever win the Cy Young. And I'll remind you, even then, his fielding independent pitching was 285, which led the National League. The home run, some bad luck defensively, caused him to underperform his expected numbers in 2023. If you assume that you have your core 3, you have a full season of Lopez and Schwellenbach, you have health from Chris Sale, and I'm not going to predict him to win the Cy Young again, but if he can perform 80% of what he did this season, and I will point out, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow, but the Zips projections for Atlanta have Chris Sale at 4.5 WAR. Chris Sale was worth 6.2 last season. So 4.5 WAR is a step back, but is still a very good season. They also have Lopez at 4.1 WAR. So there's your best case scenario. Then what you are looking at as of right now is you need one starter to be the 5th man in your rotation, and then you need another guy to step in for the first month or 2 of the season. And then obviously you're going to use other guys around that. Again, 10 to 13 starters, traditional starters, every season since 2021. 21, 22, 23, 24. It's been 10 to 13 every time. You're going to use more. But when you make that list right now, Ian Anderson is an option. Griffin Canning is an option. Grant Holmes, we talked about, they're stretching him out. He would be an option. And if they think Strider is going to make it back in the first month of the year, I could absolutely see Grant Holmes as the guy that they use in the rotation and then just slot him back to the bullpen when Strider comes back. I think that's your best case scenario, is Strider misses a month, maybe, makes some rehab starts. Maybe he opens the Columbus Clingstones new ballpark down in Columbus, and then they send him up to Gwinnett for the rest of them. I could absolutely see that as the best case scenario for Atlanta. And then you're just trying to find that 5th starter. And again, you've got options. Is it Canning? Is it Anderson? Is it AJ Smith-Shawver? Is it some of these other prospects, Drew Hackenberg and things like that? I feel that's, as of right now, pending free agency, pending signings and things like that, just with the guys you have under contract, I feel like that's the best case scenario, is either similar performance with more innings from Schwellenbach and Lopez, or limited regression from Chris Sale. Because again, it is very hard to assume that he's going to be a Cy Young winner again next season. That is just unrealistic to assume. But that is and then Strider coming back after a month. That is the best case scenario for the Braves rotation next year. And you can see how you would be in a very comfortable spot entering the postseason or the offseason and trying to figure out what you do to fill these spots. In just a minute, let's talk about the worst case scenario here. What does it look like if you have to scramble and figure stuff out, and how should that impact your postseason or your offseason? We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby talking about Chris Sale's Cy Young from last night and what it means for the Braves rotation in 2025. And before we get into the worst case scenario, I know it's not incredibly fun to talk about, but I do think we need to be realistic here with what could happen. I do real quick want to give a shout out to our friends over at Encase Cards and thank them for sponsoring the podcast. This is a custom card manufacturer. Encase Cards takes your source photos of whatever it is you want to memorialize. In my case, youth sports. My daughter plays soccer. My son plays t-ball. You send them your source photos. Their artists proceed to go in and personalize it for your kid. I actually let my kids do it. My kids picked backgrounds for their pictures. The artist went in, they added the background, they added team names, positions, stats if we had them, all that kind of stuff. And then they printed these on high quality cardstock, slabbed them in these really cool slabs that actually have built-in stands so they can stand up on a dresser or something, and then shipped it straight to us. My wife got them just the other day. She opened them up, thought they were amazing. We're actually holding them for Christmas gifts for the kids. They already forgot they picked out the background, so they won't remember. But it's the coolest thing. If you're looking for a gift for the holidays, go to encasecards.com. That's NCASE cards.com. Okay, so if we're talking about the worst case scenario for the Braves rotation in 2025, I think there's some realistic, like without catastrophizing and say everybody gets hurt and has Tommy John. That's obviously the worst case scenario. And when I say worst case scenario, I don't mean literally the worst case scenario that could possibly happen. What is realistic regression here? And because of that, how should Atlanta approach the offseason? Because Schwellenbach, Lopez, Sale, yes, they had amazing seasons. But for each one of them, and Schwellenbach less so than the other two, there are reasons to be concerned about some regression next year, okay? I think the first one, with Chris Sale, look at the very end of the year. Atlanta didn't go to normal rest for their starters till late in the year. They were trying to build in extra days and things like that. What happened to Chris Sale? The back spasms that made him miss that final day. Literally, they were going to throw him in game 162. Grant Holmes had to go out there and shove, and he did. Shout out to Grant Holmes. If you see Grant Holmes in a bar, buy that man a beer. Should never have to buy beer in Atlanta again. Grant Holmes, Tyler Matzik. Those two dudes are never buying beer again in Atlanta because we're going to buy it for them. But, and the good news on Sale's back, we talked to him again on Zoom last night after he won, and he said that the back had improved to the point where if Atlanta had advanced, you would have faced the Dodgers. Games 1 and 2 would have been in LA, and when they came back to Atlanta for game 3, Sale would have been your starter for game 3. But it is important to point out the injuries that he dealt with the 3-4 seasons before the trade. And even if Chris Sale just has normal regression in his statistics, you also do have the risk of injury. So I think you can't bank on Chris Sale doing exactly what he did for a few reasons. The first one is, obviously, the risk of injury. The second one is, what is the realistic regression? He pitched to a 2.38. His expected ERA via StatCast was 2.80. His fielded independent pitching, 2.09. So we saw the impact Atlanta's defense had, and shout out Jorge Soler for a lot of it. We saw the impact the defense had on Chris Sale. Injuries could have an impact as well. He will be 36 years old next year. Like, it's important to point out, not a ton of dudes get meaningfully better at age 36. It's all about health with Chris Sale. Ronaldo Lopez is maybe even a little bit more worrying for me than Chris Sale is. And let me be clear up front. I love Ronaldo Lopez. I think he's great. We've talked to him. He's a nice dude. I like him. The advanced numbers from last year are significantly different from what he actually did. Okay. He finished 8-5 with a 1.99 ERA in 25 starts, 26 appearances, 148 strikeouts to 42 walks and 135 and 2/3 innings. Okay. But for Ronaldo Lopez, again, 1.99 actual ERA. His fielding independent pitching was 2.92. His expected ERA via StatCast was 3.94, which is barely league average, okay? And I think it's important for us to acknowledge, and you can do this without dogging the player, it's important for us to acknowledge that he overperformed the peripherals, okay? He allowed a 220 batting average against. The expected batting average based on the batted ball profile was 242. His walk rate was average, 7.7%, 53rd percentile. But his barrel rate, below average, 8.8%. His hard hit rate, below average, 42.2%. That was 20th percentile in baseball. His ground ball rate, 39.6%, below average. He is a fly ball pitcher. And depending on how your schedule lines up, right? You got to play Cincinnati. You got to play in different ballparks that are hitters' parks, that are smaller parks, hitters' parks. There is a very real possibility that even if you get a full season out of Ronaldo Lopez, it is not a 1.99 ERA season. It is, again, if he pitched to his fielding independent pitching, it's a 2.92. If he pitches to his expected ERA in StatCast, it's a 3.94. There is another concern on Ronaldo Lopez. And again, this is the worst case thing, but that is another reason to be hesitant about standing pat next year in the rotation. Spencer Schwellenbach, I don't really have a ton of concerns with, other than does the workload manifest in some negative way next year? And I don't think it will. He said he was fine down the stretch this year. His numbers all appeared fine. I thought his control took a slight step back. But guess what? He was 95th percentile in walk rate, which is good. The higher the better, and percentile on that. So even if it takes a small step back to 90 or 85, he's still very good at not walking dudes. He got tons of chase, didn't give up very many barrels, above average strikeout rate. I'm not as concerned about Spencer Schwellenbach. That's obviously injury, right? That's the question, is injury. But I do have some concerns. We talked about that top four, having Spencer Strider as your de facto number 4 whenever he comes back. There is reason to be concerned because we don't know when he will come back. I said in the first segment, the best case scenario feels like a month into the season. What if it's longer? And what if he struggles after the second arm operation? Because we have seen guys struggle after a second arm operation. Walker Buehler, who we talked about last week, is a great example of this. He made 16 starts in the regular season. He went 1-6 with a 5.38 ERA. And I would argue that nobody in baseball is as good at picking up strikeouts as Spencer Strider, right? Spencer Strider's strikeouts per 9 innings in his career would be, if he had enough innings to qualify, would be the best in baseball history by a lot. He's at 13.5 strikeouts per 9 innings for his career. The leader right now, career, not just last year, but for career, and this is minimum 1,000 innings, is Blake Snell at 11.2. Chris Sale's right behind him. It's like fractions of a percent there. So even if Strider backs up a little bit from that, he's still going to get strikeouts. But I think Walker Buehler can be a warning about assuming the guy is going to automatically come back to the same quality he was before. What if instead of the 80th percentile outcome for Strider, you get 80% of what he was in 23? What if you get 25% of what he was in 23? Or what if, because he doesn't want to come back as a diminished version of himself, he doesn't come back yet, right? And this is all speculation, but what if Spencer Strider says, I don't want to come back and be pitch to an ERA of 4.5 or pitch to an ERA of 5. I don't want to come back off of the injured list until I know I can be effective and help this team win to get to the World Series. So what if he's not back the first half of the season? We just don't know. We don't know when he'll be back, and we don't know what he'll look like. And so because of that, you have to assume when you're doing the worst case scenario here, that Spencer Strider may not be a very additive, may not be a very, very meaningful add to the team next year. And so that means you are pushing, as of now, Griffin Canning and either Ian Anderson or AJ Smith-Shawver into starting roles. And I'll remind you, Griffin Canning, who we'll find out tomorrow if they tender him or not, and that's the show tomorrow. We're going to talk about the tender decisions for arbitration, what Atlanta's options are, and trades they might make. I have a couple ideas of guys I've pointed out that they might go get via trade, but if their team chooses not to tender them. But Griffin Canning has a career 4.78 ERA. He's shown flashes of brilliance. 11 starts in 2020. He had a 3.99 ERA. He had a 4.32 in 2023 in 22 starts. Last year, 31 starts, a 5.19. He was not good at all. He led baseball. He led the American League in earned runs. What if Atlanta can't fix Griffin Canning? Now you are down to Ian Anderson and AJ Smith-Shawver as your fourth and fifth starters. And while I fully believe AJ Smith-Shawver can be an effective major league pitcher, what if it takes him longer than we think to figure it out? Looking at this worst case scenario, I think the way Atlanta should approach this offseason is prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Atlanta needs to go out and acquire starters thinking they're not going to be able to meaningfully get playtime, starts, performance out of Spencer Strider. Atlanta needs to go out and acquire starters thinking, what if we can't fix Griffin Canning? What if Ian Anderson's not ready to be at the major league level? What if AJ Smith-Shawver struggles to acclimate and gives up too many homers at the major league level? We need to go get two starters this offseason, whether it's trade, whether it's free agency, whatever, so that going into the year, we have Sale, we have Lopez, we have Schwellenbach, we have starter 1, starter 2 that we acquired in the back of our rotation, and then whatever we can get out of Spencer Strider, whatever we can get out of Ian Anderson, out of Griffin Canning, out of AJ Smith-Shawver, out of other prospects like Hurston Waldrop or Drew Hackenberg, whatever we can get there is all Gucci, because it's just all extra, because we have 5 guys we can believe in to start the season. So prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Do I think that worst case scenario is going to happen? That all of those things are going to happen at the same time? I don't. Did I think in 2024 that the offense was going to take as big of a step back as it did from 2023? No, I didn't. And I would argue, based on the moves the team made in the offseason to, in essence, run it back offensively, they also didn't expect it to happen. And it did. And we saw what that ended up doing to Atlanta's division streak. We saw what it ended up doing to Atlanta's postseason performance and all of that. So you can't just sit back and assume this rotation will be as good this year as it was last year. You have to prepare for the worst case scenario, the realistic worst case scenario, not everybody goes down with TJ. The realistic worst case scenario. I'll point out, I mentioned Kyle Wright earlier in the show. Every 20-game winner that you have had has missed significant time in the last couple of years. Kyle Wright won those 21 games. He barely pitched the next season, missed all of 24. You traded them away. He missed all of 24. Spencer Strider won 20 games last year, missed almost all but 2 starts in 24. These guys, when they put up large innings totals, they are prone to getting injured. That is the nature of baseball and pitching in the modern game. Prepare for the worst and hope for the best. We'll be back tomorrow talking about the non-tender deadline. Again, the decisions Atlanta has to make, Ramon Laureano, things like that, as well as possible trades you may see the Braves make if there are other teams who are planning on non-tendering somebody on their roster. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, if you're listening on audio, do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. Either way, tell your friends. Go check out the Braves Today podcast for breakdowns of everything about the Atlanta Braves. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.